COVID long, Delta deep, Beta brutal. You're watching Science, Health, and Healing. We're pleased to be here in the studio with Dr. Majid Ali. Welcome, Doctor.
Richard, you are always a treat for me.
Okay, and it's always a pleasure
Just
to have
to
you.
face the camera with you opposite is like the camera is saying, no, stay focused on Richard's face.
Fauci made a statement basically to the effect that, well, if everybody gets vaccinated over the winter, everything will be, I think he used the phrase, some semblance of normal by spring, or everything could be. I thought it was a little optimistic.
That's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. Because the mothers that have been deeply bruised because what they saw was happening to their children because of the school problems and all the talk which is about this is bad and this is bad, and the sports they can shake hands with each other, they can play, they can wrestle with each other in fun. So if all the conversations are about dark things, and the people in the hotel, people in the restaurants, people in the sports, etc., the family unions, the things, this, we have allowed this virus to bring us to a state of desperation that we in our living memories have never seen that. To think that Fauci is going to prognosticate that we humans are not going to be humans anymore because he says that's not going to be true. Because we have been shocked and we have been shaken to a very deep level by a lot of misinformation. So this notion, for example, that we are going to get herd immunity, which is very favorite for them. The only thing it is possible that you will have herd immunity is if you kill that community altogether. As long as the community is 90% diabetes, 15% are kidney failure, 12 or 8% have cancer, and the rest of people are taking chemotherapy for cancer, and they're taking antibiotics. They're living on antibiotics. They're living on a combination of drugs, and the drugs are blocking beta blockers.
So what are you talking about when you say 90%?
What I am saying is our survival is if we learn to shift the focus on us. We are always demonizing the viruses, and we are attributing everything bad to viruses. We have to fundamentally shift the focus back to us. That's what I'm saying.
So you're saying that most of the American population has these conditions that make them very vulnerable.
And that has been
just give me the list. You say diabetes,
first
asthma.
Number asthma. Then you can add all chronic immune inflammatory disorders, for example, ulcerative colitis, for example, Crohn's colitis, for example, rheumatoid arthritis, for example, lupus, scleroderma. Then you go on to unusual myositis, myalgias, fibromyalgia, erythromyalgia, polymyalgia, polyarthralgia. We can go on and on and on looking at the names of the diseases, but what I'm saying is fundamentally, if we can just go over one thing, we are suffering the consequences of the power that we have given to the microscope. Life is basically a phenomenon which can be studied with physics, not with chemistry. All through our evolutionary stages, we became acclimatized to our environments by our understanding of the physics, not by understanding of the chemistry. So now, when...
physics, you mean the mechanics of the body, basically.
Energetics.
Is that a good analogy?
Energetics.
Energetics, okay.
If you start looking back at, let's say, when we were... go 5 million years ago, okay? Their observations were a physical phenomenon, which was basically a physical phenomenon. The energy of light is energy. The energy of sunshine is energy. The energy of warm water is energy. So we have shifted. I'm a pathologist.
Right.
And so Fortunately, earlier on when I got my position as a chief pathologist at Clinic Medical Center and my position as an associate professor of pathology at Columbia, fortunately for me in those earlier months, I realized that the questions that I was interested in finding the answers to, microscope could never, provide the answers. What microscope gave me, and it brought a very good compensation, very good laboratory, very good position in the staff, number of secretaries. It was because I could find the diagnostic terms that they were looking for. For example, as long as soon I said cancer, they were free to either operate on that patient or give them chemotherapy or give them radiotherapy. The gastrointestinal tracts, they were interested in colonoscopy and the biopsy. They were interested in endoscopy and the biopsy. And as long as I gave them the term colitis, call it ulcerative colitis, Crohn's colitis, call it colitis of diverticulitis, or nonspecific colitis, or ischemic colitis, or collagenous colitis. You could go on and on as long as the gastroenterologist got their diagnosis of what kind of a colitis it is. Then from that they went to PDR and they found the right drug. I saw all that, and at that time, I was a young resident who just got promoted, but I had been a surgeon before. When I started reflecting on the questions of history of oxygen on planet Earth, I wrote a series of articles on history of oxygen on planet Earth. And that time, I developed a lifetime preoccupation. The oxygen, because oxygen is the primary driver of all energetic systems in biologic matters. In the other physical matters, yes, you have the heat of the deep earth, you have the heat of the high sky, but when it comes to living beings, and especially we are talking about human beings, you wanted to know, where does it begin? How does a cell decide that last night I was a normal cell, and this morning I'm going to pronounce myself a cancer cell? How does that happen?
So oxygen is what they look for, when they take samples of the Martian soil or pieces of asteroids, that's how they look for life. They look for evidence of oxygen.
May I ask you a question that
Please.
In all these years that you had to sometimes see the doctors for your family or for yourself, how much time did they spend on two words? Oxygen, which initiates directly or indirectly all bioenergetic reactions. And insulin, which is the ultimate carburetor for the human system. It determines how much energy is produced under what circumstances. Carburetor in automobiles controls how much gasoline comes in and how much air comes in and how it is combusted and how the energy is released. But also carburetor, there are other extensions of carburetor which decides under what conditions of driving should we be doing what. We are told that cancer comes from smoking. Yes. But how does it come in? So we did, many years ago, we did smoking experiments with dogs. But we found out that it takes years and years to get the dogs to smoke with a smoking machine. Before that, the pathologist can find, these cells lining the bronchial tree of that dog and the trachea of the dog, they are multiplying. Okay?
I would think after years of teaching a dog to smoke, that the stress could give it cancer anyway.
Now you have raised another interesting issue of the energetics.
Okay.
I'm interested in bioenergetics.
Okay.
And stress is our perception of what our environment is. Okay? And so if environment keeps deepening and getting into more and more trouble, that we are going to get into more stress. But directly that means less oxygen. And when there's less oxygen, you have more acidity. So my world changed when I started thinking about studying the science, the studies at that time they were being published, the origin of life on planet Earth and the history of oxygen on Earth. So my focus shifted from just looking at bad photographs, so to speak, and saying this photograph is bad photograph, this photograph is a photograph of a healthy, sick dog or the healthy cat or something like that, I became preoccupied with the nature of things, the mechanisms underneath. Try to understand what is the world about. That world, originally, it took me to a field which was completely outside pathology and surgery.
Which
I was a surgeon who turned pathologist. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going into embryology and I'm going into evolution. And so Darwin became my teacher. And as far as I was listening a lot about Freud's story, but earlier on my intuition told me, look, you stay with Darwin and let people have Freud. And you call it Jung and Freud, etc. Stay with what you can observe and don't have any preconceived ideas. And if you want to understand that where does the disease come from, focus those conditions of energetics. Fundamentally, matter is energy. After all, Einstein taught us this, okay? All matter is a form of energy, okay? So when my focus shifted on the energetics of cells, individual cells, energetics of the liver, energetics of the heart, energetics of the... Then I was always a writer. So I used to write the pathology, these are the diseases of the giants, these are diseases of the liver, these are the diseases of the kidneys, etc. From that, it shifted on to what is the relationship that the energetics of kidney have with the energetics of the liver. And so, for example, I'll give you a simple example. If you talk to cardiologists, they will tell you this fat in this region correlates with the risk of heart disease. But the fat that you have, let's say, in the gluteal, in the buttocks and the back, okay, that does not. So you ask yourself, why? Okay, the answer is the fat here is a stale fat. It is an energetically inactive fat. It is not a breathing fat. So when this fat goes into the liver, what do we call it? We call it fatty disease of the liver. And at that time, we used to say alcoholic fatty disease of the liver because we only saw it in alcoholics.
Is that the same as cirrhosis of the liver?
That eventually, that precedes cirrhosis.
Okay.
First, there is fatty disease of the liver, and then it goes to cirrhosis. But at that time, about 50 years ago, when I started pathology and surgery at that time, the whole world was the world of a microscope. And so no medical students were taught about the energetic basis of our existence.
So everything had to be visually observed.
That's right.
Before they believed it.
That's right. But this is a world of difference when you go from energetics that we were evolved with. We evolved with energetics of oxygen. Mm-hmm. We evolved with energetics of plants and the trees and the vegetables and the fruits. We did not evolve with the Inderol, and we did not beta blockers or chemical or calcium channel blockers, or we did not involve with the cholesterol drugs or whatever you want to call them, etc. But we have been moving away and away, further away, and I hold my profession primarily responsible for this tragedy. Now everybody's looking at this, 4.5 million people, lives have been taken by Corona-19. And then we are told, the average number of Americans who have been dying with seasonal flu, the old flu influenza, they were 27,000 per year. That comes to 81,000 every 3 years as an average. Where were we, doctors, there at that time? We knew at that time that people who influenza kills are the people who have cirrhosis of the liver, or they have cancer, or they have, fatty disease of the liver, or they have kidney failure. These things that we are discovering as great discoveries, now that this is an age of Corona cousins. Mm-hmm. And Corona is not going to go anyplace. And Fauci is going to be proven dead wrong. I am on tape, and you are recording me.
Right.
Fauci is going to be proven dead wrong on this. There will be no, herd immunity which is going to save the humankind. If we are saved, and I am a human being, so my interest is in my species surviving. We are going to survive because some of us will know and see it clearly that our future, our survival, our health depends upon focus upon us, not focus upon counting how many pathogens there are. So yes, we had a success with smallpox. Yes, we had success with polio. And yes, those are crowning feats of this. But what about looking at the hundreds and millions and billions of people who are suffering from diabetes? Metabolic problems are the primary problems that we have. Metabolic problems, which we call it obesity, we call it fatty disease of the liver, we call it cirrhosis, we call it, eventually pre-diabetic, or, we call it diabetes. Richard, what I'm saying, this thing is happening slowly over a long period of time. Along comes the coronavirus. It was 1918 that we had the last opportunity for us to reflect on those things. But we were in World War I. So the Department of Defense ordered the journalists, no, you can't report it.
There was no
So the
press on
French
it, yeah.
journalists, local, they wrote a story. And to this day, we call it Spanish
flu because
Okay.
it came from Spanish newspapers.
That's right.
Because the American newspapers were prohibited from mentioning it.
Yes, but I am interested in what were the conditions that the American inquisitiveness of my predecessors, physicians, pathologists, microbiologists, virologists, how could they ever go to this idea that we can systematically destroy all microbial life around us? And remember, microbial life you cannot separate from the animal life, our goats and our cats and our cattle and
Now,
our
give me an example of what constitutes microbial life.
By tradition, we say that if there is something so small that we can only see it with a microscope, we will call it microbial.
Mm-hmm.
So all the bacteria, all the viruses, all the small parasites which are unicellular, so we can say it's just by pure tradition. And that is what I'm decrying. Because at that time when that was happening, where were my and predecessors, physicians? Why couldn't they see the obvious that you are giving up the essential attributes of life, which is oxygen, food, energy, function? Okay, so it was an altogether different model. It got replaced by chemicals. Now the chemical industry became...
It got replaced by?
Chemicals. Synthetic
yes.
compounds.
Yes.
And they became so powerful that they realized that we have to make our own drugs. So this is nuisance, we have to share too much. So they first went after the pharmaceutical industry. Then they said, but doctors prescribe the drugs, etc. We have to control. But they do it in the hospital. They operate in the hospitals and the emergency rooms. So we have to go and buy the hospital. Then some genius came and he said, you guys, don't you realize whether we buy pharmaceutical companies and we make profit that, doctors order the drugs. Whether we buy the hospital chains, it's the doctors who operate in the operating rooms and emergency rooms, and they are everywhere else around. No, I have a better idea. They said, what? We are going to buy out the minds of the doctors. Our primary business is going to be, we are going to buy them out. We are not going to just control them. We are going to buy them. So it is that if you start doing homeopathy, do you know, Richard, that every medical practitioner who gets licensed is told this, that you are licensed to practice within the standards prevailing in the state of New York or New Jersey or Connecticut. Those standards will not let you use nutrients or homeopathy or hydrotherapy or heat therapy, etc. Okay, and if you do that, you get investigated.
Only pharmaceuticals.
Only. So they said the only legitimate treatment for that, if your grandmother said she used to treat her children, let's say with ginger tea or ginger and lemon tea, or she would put a little castor oil if there was a little bit cut, or the sprained a little bit someplace. No. That's not modern science. The only thing is, if you can come with methadone, or you can come with fentanyl, or you come up with all the opiates, etc. What they did was they declared everything inauthentic, with the exception of what they were manufacturing,
Right.
and they were selling it. They invented, Richard, a simple question for you. How old were you when your mom or your dad first time told you that butter is bad for you? How old? Can you think about that?
I can't, but I know my father had a heart condition,
Yeah.
so we always had margarine. Very rarely there was butter in the house.
Second thing, how old do you think you were when the first time your mom or your dad told you that eggs are bad for you?
They never did.
Good.
The
Nor
media
did-
said,
Yes.
implied. and-
My
yeah.
my father, my grandfather, my grandmother lived to be 101 on maternal side. My grandfather lived to be 101 on the paternal side. I never saw them take the pills. They lived in our compound in the village, etc. Their food was what they grew there. They have their own cattle for milk and for butter, etc. But there was no malignancy of this cholesterol. The whole thing about cholesterol said they realized, oh my God, look at the market. Every single, we will even do cholesterol tests on 12-year-old boys, and we will tell their parents that we have to give him drugs, his cholesterol is up. He's 12 years old, but it's not. It's the mindset that I'm protesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is happening with COVID now. And so why do I call it, COVID cousins?
Yes, why do you call it COVID cousins,
Yes.
not variants?
Yes, because I have this image that whatever we are told, whatever our knowledge is, if we assume or accept the general view that Adam symbolizes to us the progenitor of human race, symbolizes it, and Eve also symbolizes that, etc. Now everybody who walks on two, we would like to say is a human, and everybody who walks in the 4 feet or the 6 feet, we already made up our mind that they are not human, okay? Because if they were human, they would be walking on two, and they would be cousins of Adams.
Right.
Okay? But you and me, and Mark here in the studio at this time, we are basically, somebody said, are you cousins? Are we going to be surprised that somebody called us cousins? No. So when I started thinking about COVID-19, before that there was SARS-1, and then there was SARS-2, and there was SARS-19, and that became COVID-19. And though now we are calling them Delta, because it's the same virus. It's a cousin, our cousin. It was detected in India, and so a lot of people died in India. Then it came over to Britain, and the Prime Minister, Boris Guy, he had declared that we are going to open the British society. I like that expression. They didn't say we are going to open the restaurants, we are going to open the school classrooms for children, etc. He said we will open the society. And then when Delta came over from India, then they said, no, we are going to close the society again because Delta is killing a lot of people. If we could only understand one thing, that in the world of biology, if you inflict a non-fatal injury on any species, evolution has prepared all species to respond to this kind of an injury. When you can kill it completely, then you have a level of safety. But all these viruses were programmed by evolutionary imperatives that if they are injured but they are still alive, they will be given the faculty to reproduce much faster. Okay, because
and
they
that's the difference between the Delta and what we were calling COVID-19.
That's right. Okay,
and
so
just let me. I'm curious about this. So let's be clear about this.
Right.
Now, Delta might be considered worse because it's more infectious.
It is also more fatal.
It is more fatal as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So
in
double
India,
whammy. Yes.
Yeah, if you go to India and look at the Indian figures, when it was detected first in India, it wreaked havoc in India first. And that was not so much infectiousness, it was actual death. because there were so many corpses, and they had to, their traditional idea is to, cremate them with certain ceremonies. And some people went over there on helicopters and they took some pictures. All of those Indian fields were full of these flames, etc. All of them.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because right now in places like Florida and Texas, the crematoriums have nowhere to put the bodies.
That's right. That's right. Okay.
They're piled up everywhere. They're trying to get those refrigerator trucks around the country.
That's right.
Because they don't have anywhere to put the coffins.
Now along comes the beta.
Beta.
The beta is...
Tell me about beta, because we
Beta-
really haven't heard about this.
Beta, again, is the main story. It's another cousin, but it's a new cousin, and it was recently insulted. The way I look at them and as images of a human being, I relate to them because I am alive and they are alive. So I am saying that beta cousin is a cousin of delta cousin, and delta cousin was a cousin of COVID-19. So with COVID-19 has been insulted for quite some time, and so the next generation of cousins were angrier because they had been insulted.
And more efficient.
And more efficient. Angry and more efficient, okay? So if we understand this simple principle of biology, all biology, that when you irritate or insult or partially damage a species, nature, just like we have, evolution has given us mechanisms that we respond to injury. We repair ourselves. And when we repair, we do the physiotherapy and we do the water therapy, we do all the things in the hope that we will end up actually stronger. And we do that because in some areas we do end up stronger. Yeah, even in fact, this idea that I want to be more aware of cholesterol because I had a heart attack, and so I want to do that. I want to go and do some exercise, or I want to walk by ponds or walk by, rivers, which is my favorite thing. I never knew a person who was walking by a pond prayerfully and suddenly dropped dead of a heart attack. But I am personally aware of the people who in cardiac rehab suddenly dropped, and that was the end of that, okay? I think we need to stand back and look at it in a philosophic way. What is our place in the universe of life? And that did we evolve by cooperating with the other forms of life around? Or did we evolve because we wanted to destroy every deer around us, every antelope around us? Okay, the fact that we like to have dogs and the cats as pets is an indication to me. It suggests way back when they were interested in coexisting with some forms of life. So they took they looked at the wolves, and they said, "Wouldn't it be nice if a wolf could live in my house? And actually, wouldn't it be nice that if a wolf could sleep with me?" And so eventually that kind of a thinking, that kind of wishfulness, it so turned out that people get dogs as pets, and what is the usual complaint that I hear from them? "Oh, my dog sleeps with me and I became allergic to it." But it tells you originally how we came. So our survival is if we try to learn to coexist with these viruses. If we learn
It doesn't seem like we have any choice.
Absolutely, because we are not following the larger view of life. We are so human-centered, so to speak, that we think everything, the only thing which is important is that we say is important, or our television says are important, or our president says it is important, okay? The farmers used to be I have personally, I don't know how your viewers will take what I'm going to say. I don't know how you will take what I just saying. Since I came from an agricultural family, and since I was interested in having a patch of flowers wherever I lived, okay, I have never seen a farmer or a gardener whom I thought he was stupid. I can't say the same thing about doctors. I can't say the same things about the people who say we are going to destroy all the bacteria. We are going to. I told you earlier on, the most advanced science is now coming, not from Germany or England and France. It used to be 3 centuries ago. Now it is coming from Japan and China. And the big difference is now the top journal in the world of science is Nature. If you look at the Nature issues, I've been subscribing it to for a long time. It used to be dominated by the English-speaking people or the German-speaking people. Okay. Now, if you look at the same Nature, these are all Japanese articles coming from Japan and from China. The difference is Japanese have learned the English and Chinese have learned the English. So they know that the top science journal in the world is Nature. And so if we want to publish our stuff. In fact, the Chinese virologist who first, identified COVID-19, okay, her first article, the first report of this was published in Lancet. So she published her article in Lancet. Why? Because Lancet is in English. She also published her article then in Nature. I think we can have room for optimism as long as we rediscover the value of empiricism in our ancestors. They tried certain things to deal with the problems of health. And so they found out something in the vegetable, something in the box, something in the roots, the value of walking. Okay, so we have to bring that dimension back, and this idea that we are going to destroy everything in our way, we will end up just like this happened with bacteria, antibiotics. Okay, there are many doctors who will agree with me right away that if you look at the totality of the experience of the last 150 years, antibiotics have done more damage than they have done good. There are many people. I know penicillin is very good for strep throat. I know that if somebody has a pneumonia, I would also give antibiotics. The difference is that I would focus on a lot of other things. Antibiotics to me is a small part, or let's say it's a moderate part, because I would give them glutathione by the nebulizer. I would give them hydrogen peroxide foot soaks. I'll ask them to take hydrogen peroxide baths. So that's also going back to that. Hydrogen peroxide is an activated form of oxygen. Ozone is an activated form of oxygen. There is a large now group of doctors who call themselves integrative physician, which means, as I am, which means I will go for good knowledge which is been validated. Whether it comes from this group or that group doesn't concern me. I am more interested in this patient that I have right now. What would it serve best? Now, when I started doing ozone therapy, intravenous ozone therapy, I wrote a long chapter on it. I was writing a book about oxygen therapies.
And what specifically would intravenous ozone therapy treat?
Okay.
Why would you want somebody to get that?
Okay. I wrote a big book on it. All chronic diseases and most acute diseases which lead to the dark outcomes, fatal outcomes, directly or indirectly you can relate all of them to oxygen. And now the air and the oxygen that we do, it's not activated oxygen. The body activates this oxygen. Oxygen, hydrogen peroxide is part of almost all biogenic or bioenergetic reactions in the human body, whether it's digestive or it's a heartbeat or you breathe or you walk and you're using your muscles, etc. This is a very interesting fact of physiology, basic physiology. Hydrogen peroxide is either produced or it is used up in almost all metabolic reactions, in almost all of them. And now also, people will say,
is that why it can bleach people's hair?
Yes, because if you put to 100%, Thank you for asking me this question. Hydrogen peroxide is produced or it is utilized in human energy-producing reactions in extremely minute quantities. Okay? So you can't blame the dark hair or light hair or dark hair or loss of hair, etc. In fact, those things come, for example, young women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome and they become infertile. They can't have children because they can't have their menstrual cycles. And that's because they're growing a lot of cysts in their ovaries, okay? But that's how they know that. Underlying, if you study these people, 5-10 years before they have the diagnosis of polycystic ovary, if you did insulin, you will find out their insulin is high. And the insulin is raising the testosterone. Testosterone is giving them the hair where they don't like it, on the chin, or loss of hair where they like it, on the forehead, on the temples, etc. So if you study these things, go deeper and deeper, you realize that nature chose oxygen to be the ultimate arbiter of all these conflicts. Now, if the oxygen goes down, nature has given us mechanisms to fight hard to restore it. So it is that in a drowning accident, a child gets brain damage within 30 minutes. And a child could lose his life within, let's say, 25 minutes of a drowning accident. So the natural mechanisms of safeguard everything where oxygen comes into the picture is a marvel of nature's, ingenuity, so to speak. But if you have a love of doing this, now, most of the time when I see patients, since I practice in New York and New Jersey, there are medical schools everywhere. There are wonderful hospitals everywhere, okay? So after I spend about, let's say, 20 minutes talking about them, the insulin, and then another 20 minutes talking about oxygen, usually they say, no doctor ever brought up this question about insulin. But isn't insulin about diabetes? I said, yes. You know insulin about diabetes because you only know those diabetics because they all wasted their insulin in the early years and the rest of their life they need insulin shot because they've already wasted it. But when the insulin level was wasting and they were literally paying it out, they were urinating their lifespan reserve of insulin. But no doctor ever did an insulin test to find out and say, hey, your insulin is way up, you are wasting your insulin, but this numbness and tingling that you talk about, neuropathy of your friend, it's coming from that. And this obesity that you have a problem with weight loss, okay, this is coming from insulin. And there is a test that I would ask your viewers if they want to do 5 minutes. Go to Google, put the word, two words, risk factors. Then put hyperinsulinism. Then put the name of any disease that comes to your mind. It could be lupus, scleroderma, it could be asthma, it could be cirrhosis of the liver, it could be cancer of the breast, whatever you want to do. Everything that I seem to say here, I'm saying comfortably because I published it. So if somebody said, Dr. Lee, you made that statement, I will give them exact citations. You can go and read that, etc. Because I love this subject, as you can tell. Okay. Richard, Google will tell you all that. It will tell you it does not matter whether the chronic disease is ulcerative colitis or Crohn's colitis or diverticulitis. It is not that somebody has called it irritable bowel syndrome or GERD or gastritis or esophagitis or Barrett's disease. It will tell you that insulin is a risk factor. Insulin will increase the possibility of that. Insulin will feed the process of inflammation. And what Google will not tell you, I have not seen it yet, because I should really put it on net, but I have not done that article yet. Unless you resolve the problem of too much insulin and insulin toxicity, you cannot address the problem of excess weight. You cannot address the problem of fatty disease of the liver. You cannot address the problems of fatty heart muscle. You cannot address the problems, I mentioned, the injury to the nerves. You cannot address the problem of shrinking brain. The number one cause risk factor for dementia is insulin toxicity, and the number one cause of Alzheimer. Alzheimer is just the commonest form of dementia. Okay? Now you talk to young people who have chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, or they might say, I've had a lot of acne, I took a lot of antibiotics, and my stamina is very low. Ask them this question. Are there times that you get a brain fog? Are there times that you read something, a paragraph in a magazine or a newspaper, and then you say, what did I read? And then you say, but this never happened to me before. Because two things happen if your insulin is going up, but the doctor never bothered to do the glucose test. The brain will shrink, and the MRI with scan will tell you that that's what's happening. The second thing which will happen is that the liver will keep swelling up with that stagnant fat that I was talking about. And an ultrasound will tell you that liver has fatty disease of the liver, and eventually it's called steatosis, and eventually it will go to scarring, and then it would go to cirrhosis. Now, COVID is especially, look at nature's way. Nature also has to protect its other creatures. What COVID cousins are, they are also nature's cousins. So as nature tries to protect us human beings, nature also will provide mechanisms and conveniences for them. So nature says, well, these are COVID viruses and they have a right to live, and so I have to provide them with a certain residence, someplace where they are comfortable, a comfortable bed where they can go and have their babies, etc. So what did nature do? Nature created a protein. It's called ACE, ACE. It lines the interlining of the air spaces in the lungs. COVID is this, we can call it fortuitous, or we can call it an accident, or we can look at this view that I'm presenting. COVID has a special affinity for ACE protein, and ACE protein lines the inside of the air spaces in the lungs.
And that's where they talk about the spikes
Yes.
attaching to the lungs.
That's
what
right.
the spikes hit and
That's
attach
right.
to.
The spikes that go into the softer protein bed. Protein bed is the way nature welcomes the COVID viruses family, the SARS family, large family. Then I call COVID cousin family. Okay, when you look at all this, then you would say, well, you know what I have to do, since COVID viruses love to go where cockroaches go, and cockroaches go where there's decomposing food in the kitchen, trash, or the restaurant's trash, etc. So doesn't it make sense that we should figure out that if we become palatable, delicious food for viral species, then perhaps we should focus on it and find out what is it that makes us so palatable and so attractive to the viruses. And the answer is very simple. We become more palatable and attractive to viruses when we are more acidic, and we become more acidic, we have less oxygen. And when we have excess insulin, that also makes us the burden of this. Just look at all the risk factors that they are talking about. The cofactors, they call it, comorbidities, they call it. Comorbidities for the virus, and that's what they take them. Look at them. Number one is diabetes, then comes obesity. Those are the problems of insulin. If you understood this relationship, you will pick up these patients by doing the insulin test 10 years earlier, 12 years earlier, okay? But we wait for that because there is much more money to be made to wait for insulin and diagnose diabetes 8 years later. Because when you diagnose diabetes 8 years earlier, patient has a much better chance of reversing it, early stage. And at that time, but the pharmaceutical world does not profit from health. Pharmaceutical world profits only from diseases. The hospital world does not profit from health. They only profit from diseases. No, yes, they do this. We used to do that in our hospital. And since I was running the lab, they would always come to me, the PR people in the hospital. Oh, there is a big health festival in Bergen County, and we have to represent our hospital. I said, so you want me to send a staff member who will draw the blood and we will do the free cholesterol test? He said, yes. And I said, when the cholesterol is high, then that you will reel them in the hospital and then we will give them cholesterol drugs. Is that your idea? And then, by the way, cholesterol drugs are known to create weakness in the muscles, okay? And the cholesterol drugs are also known to stress the liver, etc. No. Our doctors are good. We will give them small doses, etc. The whole, if you start, since I lived in that world in different countries, in different specialties, I'm very comfortable talking about it, including the administrative side, because they elected me twice as the president of the staff. I don't know why they did that. Maybe they didn't read my books. Okay. I think it seems so beautiful. You marvel. Once you begin to reflect on these relationships, etc., all non-holistic medicine is unscientific medicine. People will say, what is this nonsense? Oh, yes. Because if a woman knows that she was saving some money to buy food for her children and her husband gambled that money away, now where is the problem coming from? Okay? You have to really think about these relationships. Where is the root cause and where is the consequence of that? Once you start looking into this, etc., you realize that it is because we do not know what are the basic needs of human beings. One of the basic needs is health, and that comes from good food. That comes from not getting dehydrated. If you sometimes invite me, I would like to speak 3 hours on the issue of dehydration. And then I would tell you why our program, the program that I give for the breakfast that I recommend, it's a smoothie which people make at their own home. They don't have to go out and buy technology. Because in what I earlier described, I take 10 ounces of water and I heat it to a boiling temperature, and then I take 10 ounces of cold water and I mix them so I can drink it efficiently. That is 20 ounces of water. If you take 20 ounces of your water in the morning, your kidneys will be flushed. Your bladder will be flushed. Your cells will not be thirsty. Your cell membranes will not dry up. So when you start thinking about the biology of a person who is in a dried up state just because he is not even aware that he needs to have, sometimes during the day, extra fluids. And then comes the problem. Extra fluids, oh, I have coffee, okay, how much? 3 cups of coffee, okay. When our ideas, we relate hydration now these days to coffee intake or Coca-Cola, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which isn't the same as water.
No, it's not a water. It's not water. Similarly, the simplest way, give me a minute, I want to make this point. The simplest way to get more oxygen is for everybody to imagine where were they and what were they doing when they were 8 or 9 or 10 years old and their parents took them to a place of worship, mosque, temple, church, Hindu Gurdwara. They will notice that was a time, sacred time, everybody dressed well, and there was some good food there, parents treated them right, and as I said, they did not, Susie in the church, and they go, don't do it in the temple, etc. If you just have this idea, because I've been testing it with my patients, that when you leave after the services are over, I want you to remind yourself, let me see how it would be if I walked back to work or home, but I pretended that I'm worshiping. Just like I was worshiping in mosque or in temple or in mosque, I am walking back to my home or I'm walking back to my work, but I'm going to pretend that I'm still in the workplace. In other words, I'm walking, but I'm still in the church. I'm walking to my job, but I'm still in the temple. Well, we play a lot of mental games. We are constantly playing mental games. Unfortunately, most of the time are disease promoting. Our mental games become disease promoting. If you say the similar, the play, this is here, etc. I described it in one of my books. I used to have migraine myself. And amazingly, for 20 years, when I was in surgery and pathology, my migraine headache and vomiting was an inevitable part of this. So I could never really just go take some pills here, or Darwan or aspirin or Tylenol. That never worked for me. I had to go all the way to Demerol. And Demerol, of all the opiates, is the most addictive. People in the British colonies know that because the term is Demerol in all the British colonies. Okay, this is an opiate. Okay, it's a cousin of morphine, etc. And then I had to give myself a second shot. That was Vistral to stop the vomiting that was come from that. Now, Richard, I wrote it in one of my books many years ago. The title was Mr. Jefferson's Headache, because he used to have migraine. And I used to go to Monticello with our children just for that. So I read a lot about this, about his migraine. And I used to say, and I knew that this would be considered a foolish boast, but I would say he was such an intelligent person that if he lived today, I could teach him how I got rid of my migraine, because I haven't had even Darwan in the last 27 years. So how did I learn that?
How did you learn that?
Yes, by slow breathing. Because when you breathe slow, you get more oxygen.
So and lack of oxygen that was causing your migraines. Is that a common cause in your opinion? Are migraines caused by lack of oxygen, or are there other factors?
You have to add one other thing. Lack of oxygen, and then there have to be certain triggers. Usually they're allergic triggers, they're environmental triggers. So it would be lack of oxygen.
So I've heard people like bright lights trigger.
There are those people who are interested among your viewers. There is literature on pain, causes of pain, actually has a lot of articles linking directly oxygen. In fact, there are many people who treat headaches just playing nasal oxygen. Okay, or they go to the hospitals, just give them oxygen to breathe, and this, etc. But I am going to a much deeper level, okay, then it would be generally considered, because oxygen deficiency, first of all, oxygen deficiency is preceded by certain changes in our lifestyle or in our work environment or in our family environment, which causes our muscles to tighten up. Well, the tightened muscles means tightened arteries, blood vessels. Tightened blood vessels means less blood flow. Less blood flow means less oxygen. So when you stand back in this, that, etc., there are a lot of papers about this, and I have written also, contributed to them. There's one article, pain, all pain. Now I'm going to go above migraine. All pains are some cells cries for oxygen. This is the title of one of my articles I published. They can just Google it by this here. All pain is some cells cries for oxygen. Whether it's a chest pain and we say it's a heart disease, or it is pain and it's a heartburn from the stomach, or it's a leg pain which wakes us up during the night here, especially our senior citizens. If they're sitting someplace, if they got up there is a cramp. Charlie horses, okay.
Charlie horses,
okay.
Yeah.
So you can have Charlie horses in the mind also, okay. The Charlie horses don't only affect the muscles in the leg.
Sounds scary.
And yes, it is. But the answer to that is, you know who learns very well? Children. I have certain videos with children, and if people just Google limbic breathing, L-I-M-B-I-C. Limbic brain refers to those anatomic parts of the human brain which are involved with emotions, with fears, with kindness, with anger, and with destructive behavior. So it's the same areas of the brain which are regulating both sides of this, the good side and the bad side. Basically fight or flight response, okay? The nature had to prepare us for fight, and they had taught us to prepare us for flight, for sometimes, etc. I think this idea of applying, reading medical issues and the biochemistry and especially biology, because we interface with other species of life here, okay? We are into trouble because those happen to be the viruses, and we are intoxicated still with some successes. We did have some shining successes, okay? And we can take pride on that. But blindly applying that pride that the last polio was about in the 1970s or something, yes, we should celebrate that because that time we were very successful. But we can't blindly apply that to coronas because it's not going to work. Fauci is going to be proven wrong. I don't mind repeating it, and I hope somebody shows him this video, and then he should say, well, there is a pathologist who has big problem with your idea of herd immunity because it has already taken about 6-7 million people in India. It has already taken about 4.5 million people in America. It has, watch it, I'll make a prediction. You will have some words added to our vocabulary. One of them is going to be COVID lung. One is going to be called COVID heart. One is going to be called COVID brain. And what they would do is they will do some scans and they will find out that the brain mass is, there's a loss of brain substance. And these people would have difficulty of learning and, memories, etc. And we will come up with, just like chronic fatigue syndrome. There was Lyme disease, we made chronic fatigue syndrome. There was CMV virus, we made it chronic, or Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, okay. So as these viruses inflict functional and structural damage, and because we are not focusing how to restore our own self, our approach is let's destroy the whole thing. And we don't particularly care. There are actually beginning reports these days. If you want to do some program, there's another subject which would be worth doing it. That would be to report the published data about mental illness and related to COVIDs, okay? Mental illness, anxiety, worsening of depression, needing more medications for mental illnesses, and new patterns of mental illnesses.
And that affects people who haven't gotten COVID.
No. These are the people who are COVID positive.
Okay.
Their tests are positive.
Right.
That's how we know that they have COVID.
But what I was specifically thinking of is, a significant part of the population of the world have been severely stressed
Absolutely.
by this for whatever reason. So I'm extrapolating.
Now I understand your question. And the answer is, those people who have a past history of depression, as COVID causes some structural damage and interferes with blood supply and builds up the acidity we were talking about in the brain, they are going to have more deeper depression. But they had depression before COVID come into the picture. COVID just turned it into a deeper depression.
Just made it worse.
For example, COVID brought us this distinction of bilateral lung transplant. Okay, so JAMA had a big article on bilateral lung transplant. It was very, very, very rare situation that you heard, bilateral lung transplant.
Two lungs.
Both lungs.
Both lungs,
like
yeah.
that. But no COVID. The Northwestern is one institution, I think it's in Chicago, where they have a big center now of, because the guy performed the first bilateral double lung transplant. And then we have to realize that people after transplant, whether it's a heart transplant or it's a kidney transplant or it's a lung transplant, it can never be right, because by definition you have to suppress their immune system so the immune system doesn't reject the implant.
The organ. Yeah.
And that is not a light support for immune system. That is really big guns there will go up there. And that's why if you talk to them, all you have to do is to talk to someone who's had an organ transplant for let's say 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And situation is very simple. But I was reading that article, but actually from Texas came up some papers. I think it was back in February or March of 2021. It was 2019 when it came. That's why we call it COVID-19. Okay.
Yeah.
So within 2 or 3 months, there were some reports about CAT scan studies of lungs. And they noticed that ordinary pneumonia has a patchy appearance because there is collection of exudate, inflammatory exudate in the lungs. So the lung becomes solid, so to speak, in patchy areas which are involved with pneumonia. Pneumonia means basically inflammation of the lungs and solidification of the lungs. So then the air can't get in through the solid lung, etc. They were describing patterns of CAT scan that was they called it atypical because that was not the appearance of ordinary pneumonias that people get. And then they started looking at, they did some some people died and there were some autopsy material and biopsy, that there was more scarring. Just like the liver gets scarring from the leading to cirrhosis, now the counterpart in the lungs is the scarring begins in the delicate air sacs. But then it accumulates the fluid because if the air exchange is not free, in and out, etc., there is always accumulation of a little bit of the bodily fluids there. So that adds to the problem of solidification. So now this is a different type of a pneumonia. There was an old term, it used to be called lobar pneumonia, where some of the alcohol, lobar, L-O-B-R, the whole lobe of the lung is divided into 4 lobes, etc. So the whole lobe would become solid. And if it was a lower lobe, which is a big part of the lung, these people couldn't breathe. And usually it would happen in people who had alcohol problems, and they would not have ready access to medical treatment, or they would be found, unconscious in cold weather and stuff like that. So this is different. This is the virus. Remember I said to you, nature created a comfortable bedding for COVID viruses right in the lungs spaces by making a protein bed, which is soft for their spikes too. They dig in and then they go to sleep, and they are very nicely anchored. The air going in and carbon dioxide going out doesn't dislodge them. Okay, so nature, as I said, I was thinking about this, or it occurred to me that they are also creatures of nature. Nature also have to think about their survival, and when they would be insulted or they would be injured, they have to heal.
And evolution works for them
That's
as
right.
well as for the rest of the living creatures.
That's right.
Listen, we only have a couple of minutes left. You do want me to ask you about lipids. So I have the most basic of questions. What is a lipid?
Okay. Lipid is a term used in pathology circles when they see some substance which has fatty characteristics like butter, okay, like oils, like olive oil. Or if you have something which is really cooled, it becomes solid, right? So the lipid in the common language, if you looked at the dictionary, it would say it's a fatty substance. But I make a big distinction between fats in the body and the lipid.
Because
most people
means think fats are undesirable in any form.
Lipids are healthful always, because the lipid, I would not apply lipid to, for example, fat which accumulates in the fatty disease of the liver. Or if fat accumulates, a lot of it, in the breast and causes fat necrosis in the breast.
So in a healthy person, where would you find lipids?
Oh, in healthy persons, all of their fat, which is going to be a little bit of the fat scattered in the muscles. When you look at the muscles, there are some fat cells there. Mm-hmm. And if somebody does take the stomach out, let's say, there's a fatty pattern. We call it actually a flap, omentum, okay? This is a layer of fat which is protective. So if one loop of the intestine becomes pierced or it gets torn, nature has this system that this is a flap of fat which will come in and cover that area, so the peritonitis doesn't happen everywhere. Everywhere, wherever there is an injury in the abdominal organs, there is a system, mechanical system. Nature uses the fat flaps they're very thin, okay, and it folds them up and it covers that perforation, so that the intestinal contents don't spill it out into the peritoneal cavity. The concept is this. I have a little write-up. If somebody wants to do that, I will do that. I will post it for them, you said it. So lipids are all fatty substances in optimal health state. So if there is extra lipid, for example, in the heart, I welcome that. If there are lipid, because heart has normal lipids, okay? Heart is also protected, fatty deposits there, not in the muscle, but only in the surrounding it.
So there's lipids in all the organs.
Oh, perfect. You are good at it. You simplify my work. Yes, lipids are present in all organs in small amounts, and they have protective functions. But it's the oxidized, it is the rusted oxidized fat which becomes the problem. Wherever the fat is a problem, let's say fat necrosis in the breast, women need surgery, they have lumps, etc. Or let's say there is fat necrosis. It can happen any place. When people get pancreatitis, it can also cause fat necrosis. Fat necrosis is a pathologic state, because this is not a living fatty substance, okay? This is actually a burnt or the roasted or the toxic or the solidified, so it is a pathologic thing. So that's why I'm trying to popularize the word lipid, because lipid to me, so when I take extra fat for my bagel in the morning, New York bagel, I want to be comfortable, enjoy extra fat, have a toasted bagel and put a cream cheese or an extra cream cheese. I say whenever you are taking the starches, which you are ordinarily worried that you will gain weight, don't say no to them. If you enjoy a rice dish, okay, don't say no to this, okay? Just ask them for some more butter or olive oil or almond oil or pumpkin oil. There are all these wonderful oils. All natural oils qualify for the term lipids.
Mm-hmm. So all of them contribute to.
Yeah, I gave you the example of sesame oil. If it is brown sesame oil, it is brown because it was heated. It was heated to change that taste. If it is pale sesame oil, it is pale because it was not heated. Okay, and so I bought my sesame oil, and so I looked for the pale. There was a lot of dark sesame oil and this, etc. Now, our problem is the deep fried foods. There are too many of us. Okay, and we are not
and
really
too good too.
And we are not fully aware of how damaging it is. I think by maligning eggs, by maligning butter. Nobody maligns good olive oil. I've not heard it. But nobody sings the praises of almond oil or avocado oil or coconut oil is getting some play now, okay? Coconut oil is very good.
But they're all good.
They are all good. Yeah. All oils which are in their natural state, which have not been processed, specially heated, or preservatives are added to it, etc.
Okay, so we only have 60 seconds left.
Right.
How do you take those oils? Do you fry stuff in them? Do you add them to your salad?
This morning, after I did the mouthwash, I went to where the oils are. Usually my hand first goes to almond oil because my father told me he used to give me almond oil. I think that's why I go to the almond oil more often. So I took a tablespoon and I took it. And
so
then
you just take it straight?
Straight, okay. Yes. So then I said, should I take another one? I took another one. So some days I take two, and I said, well, I took two of the almonds, and should I take coconut? And I'll do that. I take that without ceremony because my conviction that this stuff is very good for my brain, 60% of the brain is lipids.
60%?
Yes, 60%.
We're all out of time, so I want to thank you. We can find all kinds of information and recipes on your website, which is on the screen right now. Dr. Ali, thank you so much.
Does anybody ever tell you that when he does a program with you, this conversation lights up some questions in his mind?
You're the only person I've talked to in the past 2 years, so
Okay.
hasn't happened.